Welcome to everybody to this video in which I'm going to be showcasing the Wrenn BR Standard Class 4 264 tank engine. I have a number of these in my collection and I thought it would be a good idea just to sort of go through them and review them, and you yourselves can have a look at the actual locomotives, because I think this is one of the most impressive models of a tank engine that's ever been made. What I'll do to begin with is actually start off where it all began, which is the Hornby dublo one, because as we all know, Wrenn acquired the tools and manufacturing apparatus from Hornby dublo whilst they were still under the Triang ownership. And of course they jumped ship when Triang got into some financial difficulties, taking with them the tools for Hornby dublo engines. So we'll start off with the Hornby dublo one to begin with, and this one here is 80033, and this is actually from a train set, and it was in very nice condition. It runs beautifully. So if we have a look at the front to begin with, just here, what I've done here is to repaint the buffer beam and the buffers, because it was almost always the case that this was something of an afterthought when they were being produced on the production lines, both at the Meccano factory and in the Wrenn factory. So all of the locomotives that I have in my collection have had their buffer beams and buffers repainted, as you can see. And if we go along here, we can see that the locomotive is in really good condition. There's no tarnishing or any loss of paintwork. Occasional little bit of lining missing there, which I probably can fix up. Now this was actually introduced by Hornby dublo in I think 1953-54. I think it hit the shops in 1954, and it was following on very quickly indeed from the fact that the British Railways were introducing their standard locomotives, and these first hit the rails in 1951 and were still being built throughout the 1950s. So it just shows how far Hornby dublo back in the early 50s were bang up to date with the models that they were producing. If you're looking around the back here, this model retains that hole in the back of the bunker. Now that was for something which, if you like, was an add-on to the magnet inside the model on the chassis, and there was a screw in there which would enable you to run the locomotive at lower speeds. It was a feature which eventually they discarded with throughout the 50s, because there was quite considerable improvement in power controllers throughout the 50s. So it became somewhat redundant. But they didn't get around to doing away with it until about 1959, 1960. So if you see these Hornby dublo ones with this hole in the back, that's what it is. The actual mechanism in there, I don't think is in this one. It was probably built after the decision it was to discard it. So that's something to actually note on them. And of course, it's got the characteristic Hornby dublo couplings. Runs very well, and yeah, I consider myself quite lucky to get that one. Moving on, the next one, also 80033. This was the very first Wrenn one that I purchased, and I got this in 1971. Now, before anyone picks me up on this, I subsequently refitted the plastic wheels, which were getting somewhat tatty owing to usage and the fact that they're quite awkward to get that rear bogie onto the track. It always catches with the sliding arm that's underneath. And considering you had plastic wheels, they were easily interfered with and they got slightly damaged. So I've subsequently fitted the Wrenn metal rimmed carrying wheels on this one. You can also probably just about notice that the rods are tarnished, so that's again something which has happened with age, but I've kept it in reasonably good condition, and again it's benefited from a clean up with the handrails and the front buffer beam, which is the correct buffer beam red, which is almost like a fluorescent red bordering on like an orange flavour. But actually tidying these up on your Wrenn and Hornby dublo locomotives makes a big difference to the way they look. And I'm not into the thing where you should never interfere with the improving the look and the finish on these locomotives, because it detracts from their value. I couldn't care less about that particular side. I'm much more interested in having a really fine looking locomotive, and I would always argue that it's not detracting from anything. If anything, it's improving the whole look. I'm not doing anything different to it than what wasn't already there, albeit the fact that it was very badly applied in the original cases. Again, you can see that the safety valves have been cleaned up. So that was my first one in 1971. I well remember going into Hatton's when it was a small shop on Swiftown Road, Liverpool, and the curmudgeonly old man getting his steps out and then mounting them and reaching up to get the locomotive that I was purchasing, and it had been slapped down in front of me onto the counter. And then I was parting with £7 and 7 shillings and something like that, which to me, that back in that day was quite a considerable amount of money. If we move along, this one is 80079, and I had this one resprayed professionally and renumbered 80079, and you can see here that the application of the numbers is just a wee tad finer than on the previous model, and it's got 4MT, which is the power classification, and I've also got added on the overhead electrification warning stickers. You can see on the cab, I think there's some on the front somewhere. Did I put any on the front? Perhaps, yes, just there. It's also got a builder's plate on it, and you can see that the number's been nicely applied. If you're coming round and looking at the back, around here, we can see that we've got the electrification flashes there, and we've also got the builder's plate there, which was probably either, I don't know, Brighton or Derby. They were built at various workshops, quite a lot of them being on the southern, or being allocated to the southern. They were built at Derby. This is just a brief digression on here. These locomotives were derived from the LMS 264s of Stanier and Fairburn heritage. This, in fact, having the same size reduced wheelbase as the Fairburn locomotive, and they were very elegantly designed by the Brighton draftsman. Because if we look at the top, we can see that there's a curvature on the tanks, and certainly on the bunker. If you look at the top, yeah, and how that just slopes in, giving it a better route availability and loading gauge size. Probably, certainly, definitely giving the BR standard version of this 264 tank a better route availability than perhaps the Fairburn and certainly the Stanier version which had a longer wheelbase again. Anyway, so moving along, we come to one which is numbered 80,000, which is in fact the very first one built. Now this one has had transfers applied to it. I stripped this down bathing it in a tub of caustic soda, and it burned and sizzled, and I thought, am I going to get anything out of this? But no, it just stripped all the paintwork off, and yes, it was like a bright silver grey, and that allowed me then to apply sprayed a couple of undercoats on it, and 2 or 3 semi-matte or satin black. The transfers that I put on it were from a provider who was doing literally thousands of replacement transfers for Hornby, Dublo, Wrenn and Triangle locomotives, but not just locomotives, coaches, station stuff, advertising signs, you name it, he did the lot. Sadly, he passed away quite a few years ago, and I thought I'd never be able to, reapply new transfers to any locomotives I wanted to redo. But I'll show you one which I did do later. These are actually waterslide transfers, and the early BR emblem was okay, but it was a bit lackluster, shall I say. So I took a risk and painted over the lion satin black, and prayed that it didn't bubble up and ruin the transfer that I'd put on. It didn't. It dried off, and that's been over applied with a fox transfer, which is very, very smart and nice looking. So I think that makes it look quite good. Again, looking at the front, the buffer beam has benefited from the proper buffer beam red, the application of silver paint on the buffers as well. The handrails are nicely cleaned up. I think I actually painted brass on those there, but combined with the very clean chassis and very clean valve wall-shuts valve gear, you can see that it looks very smart indeed. I'm very pleased with that one, actually. So if we move along, what we're coming to are some of the more the varied liveries that Wrenn applied to give their models a greater efficacy for collection, and obviously financial, adding to the financial strength of the company with the greater varieties. Some of these are fanciful, some people don't like them. I'm reasonably positive about them, but this one, yes, I do like myself. Again, it's benefit, if you sort of blow my own trumpet there, from the fact that I've cleaned it up a lot. This one I picked up for quite a reasonable price. Because they tend to be rarer, they weren't built in the same numbers as the BR black ones that we've just seen. They're quite expensive, but I picked this one up at a very good price because some of the lining was broken. There was, I think, 1 or 2 of the boiler bands were, what's his name? They were sort of, there was slight gaps in them, and the lining on the tank and on the bunker, there was bits missing. Hence, I got it for a good price. Fortunately, I have quite a stash of transfers, which have accumulated over the years, and I was able to replace some. And the thin white lining, fortunately for my sake and this locomotive, was of exactly the same thickness, which enabled me to sort of mend some of the breaks in the lining there. And if we look at the front of it, I've added, these are not permanent fixtures, I've added the Southern Region disc codes for this locomotive. Now, a lot of these did operate on the Southern Region of British Railways. Of course, there were never Southern Railway locomotives being built after the Second World War. So maybe it's not so such a bad attempt to sort of repaint something which operated on the southern region, perhaps in the old Southern Railway livery. It doesn't jar so much, I think. So moving along, we come to probably the most popular of the varieties. Certainly, it looks like there were more numbers of these produced by Wrenn, and this one's in LMS. Now, this particular one has got a nice sheen to it, and most of the ones that I've seen are actually in quite flat, dull finish on them, and the lining and lettering is quite spindly, shall I say. But I like this one because it has a nice sheen on it, and the application of lining and lettering is much bolder than on the ones which appear to be dull. I could be wrong on that, but I wouldn't say there's no consistency with the way the way Wrenn turned these locomotives out, these models out. But there does seem to be some varieties, and it was, to what extent it was haphazard or deliberate, I don't know. Again, if you look round the back here, I've painted the lug on the chassis which connects into the bodywork the same colour again, just to make it consistency. Again, the bright buffer beam and buffer heads, buffers themselves, stand out nicely, give this loco some presence. The handrails are being cleaned, and the safety valves have also been cleaned up. So I think that's a superb looking locomotive. These are very characteristic, strong looking locomotives. I don't think there's been a finer model ever made in 00 gauge than these tank engines. They have some real presence about them. Moving on, we come to one of the most famous of these 264 renditions, and this one is actually replicating the Caledonian livery that was applied to one of the Fairband tanks on the Lakeside and Haverthwaite Railway, I think in the 80s and 90s. I remember seeing that locomotive on the Lakeside and Haverthwaite. So the application of that livery to the BR standard one is not a million miles away from the original Fairburn. It's it's a slightly different shape, but this is, I think, give Wrenn some credit for actually extending the range by actually doing this. You can suspend some disbelief on that, the fact it isn't quite the right livery for that class of engine. It's pretty close, I think. I also managed to paint the front of the buffer beam again without overpainting the number. So the CR, 805, so is it 8052? No, sorry, 2085. So CR 2085 can be seen just about on the buffer beam. Again, the application of that red adds to the the overall effect. I think this particular loco is lovely with its blue wheels. Yeah, just savor the moment and take that in. Yeah. So moving on, we get to the one that's in BR standard green, lined out green. This one is actually replicating a loco that appeared on the North Yorkshire Moors Railway. I don't know if it's in that colour now, but actually it looks quite effective. They could have been painted in those colours, but they never, and it wouldn't have been out of place. And that's also, I've got some southern region head discs if it's running in a backwards direction. And finally, the last locomotive that I actually did in terms of stripping and repainting was this one, and we've got added detail on this. At the front I've got the lamps, and instead of the horrible gummy smoke box door number plate, this is just a transfer, and it looks much better than it does on the other locomotives. Lots of overhead flashes on this one for electrification. I actually copied that from a book on the BR standards that I have, showing, and it was showing one of these, and it had lots of the flashes on. This particular lining and things was applied by sticky back transfers, which have been produced by someone else recently. This person's done quite a few of them, not to the same extent as before with the one I pointed out at the start, but I think I'm going to have to sort of wrap it up there, and yeah, let me know what you think about these, and thank you for watching as ever.